L'kuta Sichos Chelek Yotes, Chag Sukkos Gimel, L'nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. Welcome to the year of Hakhel. This Sikha explores the mitzvah of Hakhel, specifically the obligation of the Taf, the children, based on understanding the obligation of the parents, the Anoshim v'Noshim, and it gives us a whole new insight into what is the mitzvah of Hakhel. With regards to the mitzvah of Hakhel, which the time for it is Mitzvah Yom Tov Harishon, the end of the first day of Sukkos. For das is der Anfang von the Chalamoyed, the beginning of Chalamoyed in Eretz Yisrael. This is based on a Mishnah which says Parshas Hamelach Ketzad Mitzvah Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Bishmini Mitzvah Shvius, that this is in the end of the Shemitah year, in the 8th year, which means the first year after Shemitah, and Mitzvah Yom Tov Harishon, and the Mishnah describes the gathering of the king on a wooden platform to speak to the people. So in this mitzvah, gefindt men a inyan miyuchad, was men gefindt nit bei andere mitzvah, we find a specific idea, a unique concept that we don't find by any other mitzvah in the Torah. The mitzvah von Hakhel nemt arum alle Yidden. The mitzvah of Hakhel encompasses all Yidden, euch taf, including children. The Yishteten Pasik, Hakhel es ha'am ha'anoshim v'hanoshim v'hataf. Assemble the people, the men, the women, and the children. So this concept is unique. Bechlal gefindt man nicht, als in einer Mitzvah der Reise so ein Ktanim haben eine Stadt, was mit der Reise zusammen mit alle Yidden. Generally, we don't find a biblical obligation on including children into other mitzvahs. We include them for chinuch reasons. We want to involve them, to teach them, to train them, but to say that there's a biblical, a deiraisa obligation on the child, we don't find that. Mashenkin by Hakhel is the Torah zekel in the mitzvah zusammen mit alle Yidden. However, by Hakhel, we find as the Torah includes them with everyone else, them meaning the children, that they are as obligated as everyone else. V'yesh leimar, as in them inyan miyuchad shebahakel dirik sich ois anakuda ikris in them teichen ve'inyan for mitzvah Hakhel. So we must say that in this unique aspect of Hakhel, there is a reflection of the whole fundamental concept, what Hakhel is all about, Kiddush, as we will explore in the duration of this Sikha. In other words, the fact that children are part of Hakhel actually tells us something brand new about what Hakhel is really about. Siv Beis. In Siv Beis, we're going to introduce two Gemaras that seem to be contradictory with regards to the question, is there an obligation on the children to participate in Hakhel? We learned in Pashtus, as we would learn this simply, is the Ishtatvus von Taf in Mitzvahs Hakhel Achiyuv, was es Chal nit auf die Ktanim Atzmam, nur auf dem Av ve'em, as man soll sie bringen. Seemingly you would understand that the mitzvah of bringing children, involving children in Hakhel, is an obligation on the parents, that the parents should bring their children to Hakhel. Wie die Gemara in Chagiga sagt, and the Gemara in Chagiga says, Tav lama boim, why are the children coming? To give reward to the ones who bring them. So even though they themselves, seemingly according to this Gemara, are not obligated, but by the parents bringing their children, the parents receive reward from Hashem. Unlaid them, and there's actually a halachic relevance to this. If the children are obligated themselves, or if the parents have the obligation, will actually have a nafkamina, a relevance, la halacha. Unlaid them daf bepashtus oiskommen, as euch wenn der Kotten is in azam matziv, was a godel in himself matziv is part von Hakhel. The situation would be if the child, the minor, is in a situation that as an adult, this would exempt him from Hakhel. L'dugma acherish or a suma. With regards to Hakhel, it says lirois, to be seen or to see. So from this we learn that if a person is unfortunately a suma, he's blind, then he's not obligated in Hakhel. Or it says laman yishma'u, they should hear. So if a person is deaf, he can't hear, then he's not obligated in Hakhel. So if a person as an adult is either, let's say, blind or deaf, he would be exempt from Hakhel. However, but according to this that we're saying, that the mitzvah is on the adult the parent, not on the child, then even a child who has these situations is still obligated in Hakhel. Weil der Chiyuv Mitzvah is nicht auf ihm, nor auf an Av zu bringen. Is nicht talking Chiluk in welchen Matzav der Kotten is. Since the obligation is on the father, not on the child, so it doesn't matter in what situation the child is. If the father is obligated in Hakhel, he's obligated to bring his child. So even a child that is unfortunately disabled in some way that would exempt him from Hakhel as an adult, if the chiyuv is on the father, then he does not. Then the child is not exempt from Hakhel. The fees is aber nicht verstandig. But if this is the approach, going back to the previous paragraph, where we said that the chiyuv is on the parents, not on the child, this raises a question. The Gemara sagt in Masechet Kiddushin, wenn geht zu Mitzvahs Hakhel, in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Al Amud Beis, the Gemara is discussing whether women are mechuyev in limud Torah. Are they obligated in learning Torah? So the Gemara brings various different rayas. One of the rayas is from Hakhel, and the Gemara says with regards to Hakhel, as afilu when in pasuk volt nit gestanden beferish mechiv Hakhel banoshim, even if the Torah would not tell us explicitly that women are obligated in Hakhel, volt ben dem mechiv banoshim abgelernt mit der kal v'chemer from ktanim, we could have learned the chiyuv of Hakhel with regards to women with a kal v'chemer from children. And to quote the Gemara, Tfalim chayavim, nashim lekol shekein. If the children are chayiv in Hakhel, how much more so the women are chayiv in Hakhel? Now, why is this a question? Because Eib der chiyuv bataf is not af miviyei in canal. If the obligations for children is only on the parents who are bringing them, v'yashayach to zagen av zay tfalim chayavim. How can you use the words the children are obligated? The children have no obligation. The parents have the obligation. Wie baut dat die Tfeilim atzma? Seinen mechuyev, seinen nit mechuyev. If the children themselves are not obligated, wie kemen von sehr Rüsler and akal v'chemer as noshim seinen mechuyev? How could you learn from the children to the women that they are obligated if the children are not obligated in the first place? So there's basically a stira, a contradiction in these two Gemaras. The first Gemara that we brought, the Gemara from Chagiga, implies that the children are not obligated in Hakhel. The only obligation lies upon their parents to bring them. And the Gemara in Kiddushin, which says Tfalim Chayavim, implies that the children are obligated in the mitzvah of Hakhel. So which is it? Now, and it's very difficult to explain, as the Gemara Vazog Litn Schadl Meviyeh and the Gemara in Chagiga that says that the parents are receiving reward for bringing them, but not that the children themselves are obligated, is nitla halacha, is not a halacha, das is nara haggadah adrash. It's only there as a haggadah, as a story, as an idea, but not being brought in as a halacha, because you can't paskin a halacha from an agada to Gemara, a Gemara that's telling us a story. And it's just interesting to point out that if you look into the Gemara in Chagiga, it says that it starts out Shabbos Shalmi Hoysa, that Rabbi Yeshua asked two of his Talmidim, whose Shabbos was it? So they said Shabbos Rabbi Elazar ben Azari. It was Rabbi Elazar ben Azari's Shabbos. It was his Shabbos to teach. So the question was, what was the Haggadah? What was the teaching? But it doesn't use the word halacha or the Haggadah. What was the discussion? So this Gemara might be seen as just a discussion and not a practical halacha. And therefore you might suggest that which we're saying in Chagiga, that the parents receive schar. That's more of an Haggadah. It's more of a discussion, not a practical halacha. And the halacha would be, according to the Gemara in Kiddushin, that the children are obligated in the mitzvah of Hakhel. So maybe we can suggest that the first Gemara is an Agadah Gemara, the Gemara in Chagiga, and the Gemara in Kiddushin is the halacha. So the Rebbe says this is a deichik. This is very difficult to say. Warum? We find this Gemara being used as a halacha. This Gemara is referenced in halacha. So if you're telling me that this is an Agadah Gemara, that's just a discussion and not practical halacha, how can it be used in other places? Bringing it up, we find that various of those who enumerate the mitzvahs, the Yereim, the Smag, etc., mention this Gemara with regards to the mitzvah of Hakhel. Biz, even more than this, There's a discussion in the poskim whether women are obligated to learn Torah, and there are certain poskim that use this Gemara, which we're going to mention it soon, Anashim Lilmed with Anashim Lishmaya, to teach that women are obligated, or some will learn that women are not obligated in learning Torah. They're passing halachas not just with regards to Hakhel. They're passing halachas with regards to other things as well from this Gemara. So you can see that this Gemara is an Agadata Gemara and not a halacha Gemara. So we have our question. Which is it? Do the children have an obligation to come to Hakhel, or is the obligation just on the parents? And how do you reconcile the Gemara in Chagiga and the Gemara in Kiddushin? Siv Gimel. Siv Gimel, the Rebbe is going to suggest to differentiate between the age of the children, that some children are mechoyev in Hakhel and others are not mechoyev in Hakhel, and the Rebbe is going to refute this understanding in the mitzvah of Hakhel. We can explain this according to some of the Mefarshim, as in the Psukim von Hakhel, then the Psukim of Hakhel, we're talking about two categories of Ktanim, of minors. You have one category, those that have reached the age of chinuch, so usually 6 years old. This is with regards to them. There's a second pasuk in the mitzvah of Hakhel that says of name the children that don't know yishmu v'lamdu, they will hear and they will learn to fear Hashem. As the mitzvah, this is a mitzvah on the children themselves, since they are able to appreciate, to understand the concepts that are being taught. They should listen in and they should learn to fear Hashem. Oh, but the freer dicker pasuk, but the earlier pasuk assemble the people, the men, the women, and the children. This is talking about a second category of children of a younger age, children that have not yet reached the age of chinuch. So therefore they have no understanding of what's being taught, of what's going on. So therefore they're not gaining anything personally. So therefore it said, why are they coming? Just to give reward to those who are bringing them. And from this we would learn that also the older children, also their parents receive schar for bringing them. Because it's logical. If you get schar for bringing younger children, you can get schar for bringing older children. So if the parents bring the children, they get schar regardless of the age. But the chiyuv, the obligation on the children, would depend on the age. If they're old enough to at least have reached the age of education, then the chiyuv is upon them. Lefiza kumtois, and this would mean that when the Gemara in Kiddushin says children are obligated, this would refer to children that have reached the age of chinuch. They are capable of listening and learning, and therefore the obligation is upon them to participate in Hakhel. And when the Gemara in Chagiga says it's that there is no chiyuv on children, this is referring to younger children, babies, that there's no obligation upon the children themselves to participate in Hakhel. The Rebbe tells us that this explanation, that to reconcile these two Gemaras and to reconcile these two Psukim, to say that the difference is that we're talking about different ages of children, this is very difficult to say. Varum Aleph, for the following reasons. Number one, in other mitzvahs, even when we say that a kid who's old enough to understand is obligated to do this mitzvah, the obligation still doesn't lie on the child. The obligation, the onus, is on the parent. Not if it's the one who's raising him and educating him, but is estimav. Seemingly this would apply here too. That even though you're going to say the child is more involved, he understands, but who has the obligation to bring the child? The parent. And even if you're going to tell me that when it comes to the mitzvah of Hakhel, there is a unique commandment. Like we started the Sichel, this is different by Hakhel, saying that when it comes to Hakhel, there is a unique obligation, and the children need to be under the mitzvahs. And in this case, the mitzvah of Hakhel, the child is considered an obligated party. Especially according to the Rishonim that hold as a cotton that when it comes to other mitzvahs, if a minor that is old enough, that has reached the age of education. These Rishonim hold that even though the obligation lies on the educator, Maintis aber nit as their cotton is potter doesn't mean that the minor on his own is exempt. Nor mitzat mitzvah achinu chayis der cotton am mechuyev in der mitzvah. Rather, these Rishonim hold that because of the mitzvah of chinuch, this means the cotton is obligated. It's just that the obligation is on the father, but the cotton himself is also obligated. So if you're going to say that, especially according to those Rishonim, you could say that here by the mitzvah of Hakhel, there is a chiyuv, there is an obligation on the child to participate in Hakhel. We still have a problem with that. But this would create a novel approach to the differentiation between the two categories of ketanim, of minors. As by ketanim, was der chiyuv mitzvah is nor af mivi'ein, that by the very little children, where the obligation and the mitzvah is only on the parents who are bringing them, as the Gemara Masechta Chagigah says, kedei liten schar lemevi'ein, is the chiyuv von Hakhel oich then, as we said earlier in the Sikha, the little children whose the obligation lies only on the parents, then that would include even children who as adults would have been exempt. Now they are obligated because their parents are not exempt. But the older children, those that are old enough, the tfalim, the Masechta Kiddushin, those that according to the way we understand it now, are being referred to as tfalim in Masechta Kiddushin, since they themselves are considered obligated in Hakhel, is their chiyuv chol, nor dan when sie seien in azamatze was begat lusam, then their obligation upon them would be only if they would be obligated as an adult. So now all of a sudden there's a new distinction. That even as a child, let's say a child is a summa, is blind. So if he's 5 years old, 4 years old, then he has to come to Hakhel because his father has an obligation to bring him. If he's 10 years old, then he doesn't have to come to Hakhel because since the chiyuv is upon him himself and a summa is not chayiv in Hakhel, so therefore that exempts him as well. So we know that adults that have specific disabilities are exempt from Hakhel. We know that children are obligated in Hakhel. Children have to be brought to Hakhel despite their disabilities. But according to this understanding of that there's a difference between younger children and older children, that would also make a difference with regards to children with specific disabilities. That if they're younger than the age of chinuch, then they have to come anyway because their parents have to bring them. If they're older than the age of chinuch, then they don't have to come because they're exempt. We don't find anywhere in halacha such a distinction. We know that, as I said before, we know that adults are exempt in certain cases, but we don't anywhere see in halacha to differentiate between older children and younger children with regards to the exemption. So to say that there's this difference when we have no support to it is difficult. Beis ve'ikar. There's a second problem and a greater problem, a more fundamental issue. Von Lashna Gemara in Kiddushin Tfeilim Chayavim und nicht Ktanim Chayavim is mashma bepashtos as dort redt sich wegen demselben zu Ktanim wie in Chagiga Tefallin Taf. The term that the Gemara in Kiddushin uses is Tfalim. Where does Tfalim come from? Tfalim comes from the word Taf. So the same word that's used in Chagiga, which is Taf, is technically the same word in Kiddushin used, which is Tfalim. Und wie Rashi is medayik as Tfalim Chayavim, weiß man von Lashon Ve'hataf, versteht man von Yidikin Pasuk. Nicht von dem Pasuk Shlach is of Neim Asher Le'yadu V'Gomer. And Rashi himself indicates that how do we know that Tfalim are Chayiv? Because it says Ve'hataf. And Tfalim comes from V'hataf. We're not learning it from the pasuk of Bnei Asher Le'yadu, which is the second pasuk which we referenced earlier when we brought this pirush. But rather, Rashi says that the word Tfalim is learned from V'hataf, because Tfalim and Taf is the same thing. It means little children. From them is muchach. From this, it is clear as der Kotten Atzmi hat auf sich dem Chiyuv from Mitzvahs Hakhel, that it's the Kotten himself, Tfalim Chayavim. The cotton himself is chayv. On lady days as the chiv is chal eichev ktanim ktanim, zijn eiche zemechiyav mitzvahs hakel. And according to the opinions that even the little children are obligated in hakel, it's not just because of their parents or are bringing them, but they themselves are mechuyev. Tfalim chayavim. The children, even the little children, are chayiv in the mitzvah of hakel. And if so, is hadar kushila duchte. Then we have our question: how does this Gemara in Kiddushin Tfalim chayavim, that even very little children, even younger than the age of chinuch, are obligated themselves in the mitzvah of hakel? How does this reconcile with the Gemara in Chagiga that says that the children are coming only to bring reward to their parents, and they themselves are not obligated? If the Gemara in Kedushin says Tfalim chayavim, and it doesn't mean little children, it doesn't just mean older children, it means even little children. And initially, not only is the question from the stira between the two Gemaras, it's also a logical question. You can't obligate a child that is not old enough, that's not mature enough to comprehend what's going on. The reference to 28 at the Gemara in Psachim, when the Gemara says chiyuva the dardiki, you're going to make an obligation over there. It's talking about the question in the Manishtana about madbilin. So the lashon in the question was that today we're obligated to dip. So the Gemara, I think it was Rav Safra, says chiyuva l'dardiki. The children have an obligation. You can't give obligations to children. So the Gemara changes, doesn't say we have an obligation to dip. Ein onu madbilin halalas madbilin. We dip. It doesn't say we're obligated to dip. We're just something that we're doing, because you can't put an obligation on a child. So we have our question. We started out saying that there's a uniqueness by Hakhel, that it includes the children. But the question is, what kind of obligation is there upon the children? Is it like the Gemara in Chagiga says, that the children are not obligated to be there, but the parents have either an obligation to bring them, or the parents receive schar for bringing them? Or is it like the Gemara in Kiddushin, that there's an obligation upon the children themselves, Tfalim chayavim, the children of themselves are obligated to participate in Hakhel? So to explain this, we're going to go a little bit further back in this Gemara, the Gemara in Chagiga, that says, Taf lama boin, kedelitin schar lemiviyayin. We're going to try to understand more of that Gemara, which is talking about the Anoshim v'Noshim. And once we understand the Anoshim v'Noshim, we're going to be able to understand the Taf as well. And just to go back, as I started mentioning before, they said it was the Shabbos of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. What was the Haggadah? What was the discussion? That he darshan that Hakhel. What did he darshan? He said like this: if the men are coming to learn, the women are coming to hear. Why are the children coming? So now we're going to explore this first line. See if that. We'll understand this by first discussing, explaining the beginning of this drash of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. If the men are coming to learn, the women are coming to hear. What is he teaching us? What is he telling us that we don't already know? It already says clearly in the pasuk, they should come to hear, they should come to learn. So what's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah telling us with these words? We can't learn as inami mit im anashim lilmid v'nashim lishmeya is kevnasi nit tzufna nachidish nor zog das vi agdom zum siyum taflam abayim. You can't say you're right. There's no chidish. It's just an intro to his ultimate question, to his subsequent question. The taflam abayim. Al derech asignin bishleme oder hanicha anashim chulu nashim chulu. As if it would say bishlema anashim bayim lishmeya bayim lilmid. Nashim boys lishmaya. I would understand if you why the men are coming, why the women are coming. They're coming to learn and to listen and to learn. But taflam boy. So maybe it's saying it in a manner of bishlama. Not that he's telling me something that I don't already know. I know it. I say, but he's just telling me something to introduce the question: why are the taf coming? But you can't say that. Varum aleph demot anstatt im gedarstehen der lashna ragel bishlama, because it doesn't say bishlama. If it means that, as if it would have said Bishlama, then it should have said Bishlama. Bishlama Noshim Boim Lishmaya. Lilmit. Noshim Bois Lishmaya. Doesn't say that. It says Im, implying that there's more to it. Beis Nachmer. Eich Bishlama sagt die Gemara, wenn es ist dain dem Achidish. Inyan, other svara. Even Bishlama is only used to tell me something new, a new concept, was me lernt arus, und nicht das, was steht mir ferisch. That I'm learning from this conversation, from this discussion, something that isn't written explicitly. Similar to it says, I understand according to this man the Amar, he's coming to tell me kach v'kach, so and so. But this man the Amar, what is he coming to teach me? So when he says Bishlam man the Amar, he's telling me something that the first man the Amar is teaching me, that I don't know from the basic psukim or the basic teachings. But here, when Rabbi Lazar says, he's not telling us anything that the pasuk doesn't say. This question is even stronger. The drasha from Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah wird gebracht in Pirush Rashi ala Teira. Rashi brings this. Eingeteilt auf die besondere Werte von pasuk, divided in separate teachings according to this individual psukim words of the pasuk. Af anoshim sagt Rashi lilmid. On the word anoshim, Rashi comes and says lilmid, to learn. Then he quotes the word noshim from the pasuk. Unis mefaras lishmaya. They come to hear. And then when it comes to the word taf, he says, why are they coming? To give schar, reward to those who bring them. So from this we see that it is explaining something independent of the taf lamaboin. So what is it telling me? What is Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah teaching me? What is Rashi bringing when he brings it down? What don't I already know in the fact where it says Laman Yishmadu, or Laman Yishma'u, or Laman Yilmadu, that I needed Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah to say, so in order to understand the taf, we first have to understand the beginning of this statement. What does it mean when Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah is telling me that Anoshim are boim lilmud and the Anoshim are boys lishmaya? In Sif Hey, he's going to suggest, the Rebbe is going to suggest that this is a reference to a machlokes between Ben Azai and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah with regards to the obligation of women to learn Torah, and the Rebbe is going to refute that answer, that explanation. We can explain this according to Tosfos. Yerushalmi says the Leike Ben Azai, this teaching of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, that Anoshim are boim lilmid, and the Noshim are boim lishmeya. The men are coming to learn, the women are coming to hear, is to disagree, to negate the opinion of Ben Azai. The Omar Chayev Adam Lalamid Libitei Torah, who Ben Azai holds that a man has an obligation to teach his daughter Torah. The pasuk says that they should hear and they should learn the mashma, the kel lechnoshim, which seemingly includes the women, which would mean which would imply that a woman has the obligation to yilmedu, to learn. Therefore, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah holds that we're not supposed to learn Torah with women. And he argues with Ben Azai, and therefore he has to explain, as the pasuk made l'tzdadim, the pasuk has to be split in half. Anoshim boim lilmud, v'noshim bois lishmaya, blois lishmaya. The women are coming solely to hear and not to learn. In other words, if you look at the pasuk, it says anoshim v'noshim, etc. The man yishmu v'man yilmadu, which would imply that yishmu and yilmadu both go on both anoshim v'noshim, which would work according to Ben Azai, who holds that the noshim are part of the mitzvah of learning Torah. But according to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, who holds that the women are not obligated in learning Torah, then he has to divide it. Anoshim is for the lilmud, and the noshim is for the lishmaya. But it's difficult to learn this. From the sugi in the Gemara and the drasha of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, kumen lernen bigger dinim pratim for Parshas Hakhel, because this sugi in the Gemara, and specifically this teaching of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, is coming to teach the details and the laws of Hakhel. And not the din with regards to the obligation or the prohibition of women to study Torah. So to say that Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah would introduce a statement to reference a halacha that is not related to this specific discussion is very difficult to understand. So we're back to our question. What does Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah mean when he says Anoshim boim lilmud v'noshim bois lishmeya? And the reason we need to understand this is in order to understand the taf. what is the chiyuv of the taf? If we'll understand the anoshim and the nashim, then we'll also understand the taf as well. Sivav the nekudas abir bazeh, and in Sivav is going to begin the biur in this by discussing upon whom is the mitzvah of Hakhel. And Sivav is going to suggest that the mitzvah of Hakhel is upon the king. The king, as a yachid, has a mitzvah to be makil, to assemble the Yidden and to speak to them. Sivav, the nekudas abir bazeh. Pashtus haposik Hakhel asam hanoshim v'anoshim v'taf gomer leman yishmu uleman yilmudu v'yoru v'gomer. I see that the man here is underlined because it's going to be relevant later on in the Sikha, or very soon in the Sikha. The posik says, gather the people, the men, the women, and the children, so that they should listen, so that they should hear, and they should fear Hashem. The way we understand this pasuk very simply is as the mitzvah von Hakhel is af hayachid, the melech, erzol makel zayne so anoshim v'atav. This mitzvah is on the individual king, that he should assemble the men, women, and children. Aber nit mitzvah the anoshim v'atav go, for the mitzvah is not upon the people. Und der Hemshech HaKasuv l'man yishmu l'man yilmudu v'yoros Hashem l'keichem. Last is in the continuation of the pasuk is mevar di matore u'mechuvim from the mitzvah, is explaining the outcome, the goal, the purpose of the mitzvah. And he explains in the brackets that leman do, the word leman, is not to explain what the mitzvah is. Rather, it's al derech vi leman b'kama mekemes b'teira or l'dugma. It's similar to other lemans in the Torah. For example, Leman Asher Yitzav Es Banav Es Achrav, it says about Avram Avinu that he is going to command his children and his household after him. Or Leman Yirbu Yumechem B'Mevenechem, that if we keep these mitzvahs, then this will multiply our children, our days and the days of our children. V'oid and others. It's not something that's occurring now, an automatic result, an automatic outcome of what's happening now. It's a subsequent event. The mitzvah is the king to gather the people. The goal is that subsequently they will become inspired to fear Hashem. The goal of the mitzvah of Hakhel, which is being done by the king, who is gathering them and reading before them the parashas of the Torah, is as is all from them that by the rest of the Jewish nation there should be listening and learning. So the mitzvah is upon the king, and the subsequent outcome is that the people that were there, which is the rest of Klal Yisrael, will learn and be inspired. And seemingly, if you look in the words of the Rambam, this is what the Rambam is saying. Mitzvah saseh lahakil kol Yisrael anoshim noshim v'taf. It's a mitzvah saseh to gather, to assemble the people, men, women, and children. And to read to their ears the words of the Torah. Parashas that motivate them. The mitzvahs and the mitzvahs. Umechaskis yedeim, and strengthen them. B'dasa emes, in the faith of truth and Yiddishkeit. But from them lashon is moving. From these words, it's understood as that Aleph number 1. Mitzvah Hakhel is nitke mitzvah yadrid al tzachid. The mitzvah, when it talks about the actual Hakhel, it says lehakil, not lehi koil, to be gathered. Lehakil, that the mitzvah is not on every individual yid, as darf kumen sich mishtatev sein mitzvah Hakhel, that he has to come and participate in Hakhel. Nor says a mitzvah to makil sein. The mitzvah is to assemble them. When the tzivah is to melech, was bekechel lehakil. So who is this mitzvah geared to? To the king, who has the power to gather them, or to bezdin, not to the king himself, to the bezdin, who also have the power to gather the people. That's one thing we learn from this Rambam. Base, mitzvahs Hakhel, mitzvahs melech. Likreis baznei min haTorah, to read who's fulfilling this mitzvah, the king. Tikra gomer, Hakhel gomer, mider matorah, with the goal, and the Rebbe adds in parentheses, V'shlema Yiseidim Mizeh. Not only is this the goal, it's part of the commandment to the king, that he should gather them and read to them in a way to get to the result that they'll hear it and it'll inspire them. That's why he reads the specific parashas that encourage them to do the mitzvahs and strengthen them from Abima, which was the Rabbi discussed in a different sikha. Why? That the king was on a platform, all in a way to inspire and get the Yidden to listen and to hear. So we see from the Rambam that the mitzvah is on the king. The goal is to inspire the Yidden. But who has the mitzvah? The king has the mitzvah. The Anoshim Noshim Etafes Nervous Durch Zeir Kumen Vert Niskayim Der Tzivi was Daif and Hakhel. So what's the role of the men, women, and children? That through their showing up, this is how the gatherer, their melech, the king, could fulfill his mitzvah. When the Yidden will listen and they'll learn and they'll fear Hashem and they'll keep the mitzvahs in the future, this is how we can implement and fulfill the goal and the purpose of the king's mitzvah. So this is the suggestion that the Rebbe gives us in Siavav with regards to the mitzvah of Hakhel. That if you were to look at it from the Psukim, if you look at it from the basic understanding of the Rambam, it seems that the mitzvah is incumbent upon the king. The role of the rest of the Jewish people is to be there so that the king could do his mitzvah and to get inspired so that the purpose of the mitzvah is ultimately fulfilled. But the obligation is upon the king. Zayin is going to say that the chiddush of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, in the words "Hanoshim boim lilmid," the Hanoshim bois lishmoya, is to tell me not that the mitzvah is solely on the king, but that there's also a mitzvah on the Hanoshim v'noshim, on the men and the women, to come and be part of Hakhel. They also have a mitzvah. He says, so comes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and explains the mitzvah of Hakhel. Is das little maid. The men are coming to learn. The women are coming to listen. With this, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah has been mechadish two things. Aleph, the first, as is a chiyuv gavra eich avdi anoshim v'noshim atzmam zu zayin boim kumen anoshim boim. There's a mitzvah there's a chiyuv gavra, there is an obligation upon the individual men that they should come, and women from chotz as der chiyuv mitzvah the Torah rev kolektev makel de melech, even though the mitzvah the Torah places upon the king. Because of the mitzvah upon the king, there is the result of this is that there is also a mitzvah on the people to help the king fulfill his mitzvah, and they are not just the cheftza of the mitzvah that the king is gathering them, but they have a chayvas gavra. They have an obligation to participate in the Hakhel. In order to understand this concept, on the one hand, the mitzvah is upon one individual, but because of that, the mitzvah extends to others as well. The Rabbi is going to bring an example from the words of the Ran with regards to the mitzvah of pirya v'rivya, of reproduction. Similar to the famous words of the Ran with regards to a woman when it comes to the mitzvah of having children. Even though a woman is not obligated to have children, the mitzvah of pru revu is upon the man. A man has a mitzvah to reproduce and bring children into the world. A woman does not have that mitzvah. Mikol Makom, this is the quote from the Ran, Yeshla mitzvah, even though she doesn't have the obligation, she gets a mitzvah of having children, because she is helping her husband fulfill the mitzvah. Since the husband needs her to fulfill the mitzvah, therefore she gets the mitzvah as well, despite the fact that she doesn't have the obligation. Similarly, the Rebbe is comparing this to the mitzvah of Hakhel, that although the chiyuv, I don't want to play with the words chiyuv and mitzvah because the Rebbe interchanges them a lot, but although the mitzvah initially is directed to the makil, to the gatherer, to the king, nevertheless, because of that, there is a chayva, and there's an obligation upon every individual to participate in Hakhel. Now the Rebbe says that there's a difference. There is a difference between the mitzvah of having children and the mitzvah of Hakhel. But again, the pirya v'rivya vert nit kin chiyuv after isha. Says nervous yeshla mitzvah. The woman doesn't have an obligation. It's only that she has a mitzvah. Her participation is because of the reality of the facts of life. The man cannot fulfill his obligation to reproduce without the woman. But the woman is not the mitzvah. It's the child that's the mitzvah. So the woman is helping the man do his mitzvah, and therefore she never becomes obligated. But the only thing that she has is the mitzvah. She has the mitzvah without the chiyuv. Benitten die dann aber, but in the case of Hakhel, is the Shtatvus from the Anoshim v'Noshim v'Taf nit nur mitzat ha'metzias. It's not only that the king cannot do a Hakhel without them, which is true, but that's not the only detail here. They are part of the mitzvah. They zayn in die Chefze von der mitzvah. The Anoshim, Noshim v'Taf are the object of the mitzvah. Das in was darf sich uften the Yishmael Yilmadu. They are the ones who the king has to teach, so they should hear, learn, and be inspired. So now they become obligated not just to help him fulfill his mitzvah, but for them to be there. So the Rebbe therefore brings another example, which is more similar. That there's a mitzvah asay on Yidden to be blessed by the Kohanim. In other words, even though the mitzvah is for the Kohanim to bless Yidden, nevertheless the Charedim says that there's a mitzvah on Yidden to get blessed. Similarly, there's a mitzvah on Yidden to be by Hakhel. Not only like in the case of the woman, that she gets a mitzvah for having children because in order for the man to fulfill his mitzvah, which in this case is having a baby, he needs the woman to have the baby. In the case of Hakhel or Birchas Kohanim, the mitzvah of Hakhel is to teach someone. So you need the person there to teach. It's not just to gather them; it's to teach them. And therefore, the people become a chelek of the chefza of the mitzvah, and therefore there's an obligation upon them to be there, not just to help the king, but they have to be there as well. So this is the first chiddush that Rabbi ben Azariah is telling us, that the mitzvah is not just on the king, the mitzvah is on the people. The anoshim boim, the noshim, the men and women have to come in order to learn, to fulfill their mitzvah. It's not just a mitzvah on the king. Beis. A second, der leman yishmu leman yilmedu is nit nor di matoras v'teitzoas ha-mitzvah. Earlier we were learning that the mitzvah is to gather them, and the goal and outcome of the mitzvah is the inspiration that we give to the Yidden. Comes Rabbi ben Azariah and says, this is not the extent of it. No, das is the Teichen HaMitzvah. Leman Yishmu, Leman Yilmedu is the mitzvah. That is the definition, that is the parameters of the mitzvah. Der Chiyuv auf die Anoshim v'Noshim zu kommen zu Hakhel is nicht nur zu sein dort, die soll sich durchführen, die Mitzvah von Hakhel as von der Melech. The obligation for the people to be there is not just to be able to fulfill the commandment of the king to gather the people, and all the people have to do is show up and be there. Und durch den wird gerecht werden, die Mataras Mitzvah bechlalu ba'asid, and then ultimately, eventually, we'll reach the goal, which is to inspire the people. Nor der Lilmid v'lishmeya is echt der Teichen von der Mitzvah, von Bias Anoshim v'Noshim. The learning and the hearing is the whole definition of the mitzvah. Why are they coming? Lilmid v'lishmeya. It's a very important nekuda here. Initially, we said that according to Rabbi ben Azariah, that before Rabbi ben Azariah, the obligation is only on the king. Comes Rabbi ben Azariah and says, number one, the obligation is on the people as well, because they are creating the Hakhel. They are making the Hakhel happen. Number two, the mitzvah is lilmid v'lishmeya. The lilmid v'lishmeya is not an outcome. It's not a result. That is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to teach the people. So now we understand that Rabbi ben Azariah is chiddush. We asked in the beginning of Siva, what's Rabbi ben Azariah saying? Anoshim boim lilmid, noshim boim lishmeya. What's he coming to tell us that we don't already know in the pasuk? It's very simple. He's telling us that the mitzvah is not just on the people, that they have to come to help the king fulfill his mitzvah. Rather, the mitzvah is on the people themselves, and the mitzvah is part of the mitzvah is lilmid v'lishmeya. Now we can understand the hemshech about the taf. Hemshech is after Rabbi ben Azariah. Lilmid v'lishmeya is the tiyalas mitzvah from the Anoshim v'Noshim. Now comes the Rabbi ben Azariah and says, I understand why the men are there. I understand why the women are there. They learn and to hear. Why are the children there? What kind of obligation is there to the children's coming? Bedugmet them coming from the Anoshim v'Noshim, as it would compare to the men and the women. And this is a very important nekuda, so follow inside. Neisif auf dem Tzad HaShaveh von Anoshim Noshim v'Tav, was durchseher allem ins Kumen, werd mekuyim die Mitzvah von der Makil, und nutzgefit die Matara von Hakhel, in addition to the common denominator between the men, women, and children, that they're coming, their being there, fulfills the Mitzvah of the Makil, of the gatherer, and the purpose of Hakhel. In other words, in the chidushim of Rabbi ben Azariah, there were two chidushim. One chiddush is that there's a mitzvah on the people to come to help make the Hakhel happen. That on that level, the taf are included. The taf make the Hakhel bigger. When the king has a mitzvah of Hakhel, if the anashim are there, the nashim of the taf are there. They are all part of the mitzvah of Hakhel. But then there was a second thing that the Rabbi Azariah taught, Lumid V'Lishmaya, and Lumid V'Lishmaya as part of the mitzvah. But the problem is that Lumid V'Lishmaya doesn't apply to children because they're not old enough necessarily to understand. So the Rabbi Azariah says, what is the content? What is the deeper purpose of the children's coming? What is the second layer of bringing the children if they can't do Lumid V'Lishmaya? It's very important the Kudah that we understand what's happening over here. In other words, that there's a Neisef Nitzad HaShavah from the Lashon HaShatam. I'm going back. That the first part of the mitzvah of Hakhel that Rabbi Azariah is teaching us, this is something that applies to the Taf as well, there's no question. The second thing, the base, right before Sif Ches, where Rabbi Azariah is being mechadish, that a chelik of the mitzvah is leman yishmu, leman yilmedu. And this Rabbi Azariah says, how do the children fit into this? Of them, and for Rabbi Azariah, and therefore Rabbi Azariah answers, as the ma'aseh for natav boim, is litein schar l'miviyein. The idea of the children coming is to give schar to those who bring them. V'baldas av di tav is nishayach ken chiyuv. V'baldas av di tav is nishayach ken chiyuv. Is the inyan bezevet yelas nisefes no litein schar l'miviyein. So he says, Taka, in the area of Lilmid V'Lishmaya, there's no benefit to bringing the children. The only benefit of bringing the children in that realm is the fact that those who bring them, the parents who bring them, will get extra schar. And now he's going to apply this in Siftes. He's going to apply this new understanding of the Gemara to the stira, the contradiction that we had earlier between the Gemara in Chagig and the Gemara in Kiddushin. Alpiz is verstandig, but the Gemara sagt Tfalim chayavim. Now we can understand why the Gemara in Kiddushin says the children are obligated. And there's a possibility, there's a thought that we could learn the women's obligation from the children's obligation through a Kal V'chemer. Okay, now, in the Mitzvah von Hakhel, in the actual mitzvah of Hakhel, which is the first layer that we discussed previously, Anashim, Nashim, and Taf are equal. Because when they come, when they arrive, they help the makil, they help the gatherer fulfill his mitzvah. Because the makil has an obligation to gather everyone, so all of the Yidden, men, women, and children, become the chefzer shel mitzvah. When it doesn't matter. There's no difference what age of children we're talking about. I feel like even very little children, Zayin and Klal and Tfalim Chayavim are included in Tfalim Chayavim. As we said earlier in the Sikha, that Tfalim have to include little children because Tfalim comes from the word Taf. So now we understand, yes, when it says Tfalim Chayavim, it doesn't just mean the older children, it means even the younger children. Because through these children, whether they're 10 years old, whether they're 2 years old, this is part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah of the makil, of gathering all the people. And since the children are chayavim, which means they're part of the mitzvah of Hakhel, then even if it wouldn't have said the word nashim by Hakhel, hypothetically, we could have learned from the tfalim, from the children, that the women are part of the mitzvah. The only difference is between the nashim and the tfalim, to go back to level 1. The aleph. By Nashim, there's an additional aspect that, in addition to being part of the Chefzer Shel Mitzvah and therefore obligated in Hakhel, they also obligation on them because they are mature enough to understand. Avdi Nashim Gufa. But by Ktanim it doesn't shayach. By Ktanim you can't say there's a chiv as Gavra, because the Ktanim are not bnei deya. You can't give an obligation to a child where there's something that the child has to understand and learn. But with regards to being part of Hakhel, the children are as part of Hakhel as the women and the men are, and therefore it says Tfalim Chayavim. So now we've answered our questions. There is something very unique by Hakhel, that the children are part of the mitzvah. What does it mean the children are part of the mitzvah? That means that in order for the king to fulfill his mitzvah, he needs the people to show up. And in this regard, men, women, and children are 100% equal. They have to be there, and by being there, they make the mitzvah of Hakhel more complete. Then there's another layer, which is the man yishmu, man yilmedu, which according to the Blazman Azariah is part of the mitzvah. In this aspect, the children are not part of this because they're not b'nei deya, they're not mature enough to understand, and therefore the Gemara says in Chagigah that they're coming, besides the fact that they're part of Hakhel, Tfalim Chayavim, in this regard they're coming, they're bringing reward to those who bring them, but they're not part of the Lilmid V'Lishmaya. In Sif Yud and Yud Aleph, we're going to discuss the Pnimis Anyanim. Let's take this a level deeper. We understand Al Pi Nigla, the Gemara in Chagigah, the Gemara in Kiddushin, the idea that Hakhel is unique, that it includes the children, unlike any other mitzvah. Let's take this a level deeper into Pnimis Anyanim. Sif Yud. The beer as follows. On the one hand, we find that everybody is involved. Everybody is obligated, men, women, and children. Conversely, is there chiv mitzvah and makil of the melech or bezdin, that the actual mitzvah is upon the gatherer, the king, or bezdin. And I noticed a beis in the next column, so I'm guessing at some point there's supposed to be an aleph. There's going to be two elements in this lesson that we're taking up in Pnimis Anyanim. One, from the fact that everyone is obligated. Two, from the fact that the chiyuv is on the melech. But I'm moving up. Let's start with the fact that everyone is obligated. This could be understood according to the words of the Rambam. At the mitzvah von Hakhel, we said this before, is lachazik das emes, to strengthen the faith of truth, the Yiddishkeit. This mitzvah, amud chazak, is a firm pillar, v'chavid gadol badas, and a great glory in the religion. What does this mean? You say amud chazak, as in Yonei von Hakhel is to megala zayin din nekudas emunah by yadid. The idea of Hakhel is to reveal the spark of emunah in every yid. But also there you say v'amud v'shtarktim das emes. This emunah is the pillar and the foundation that strengthens the religion. Machzikis yedayim das emes. It strengthens their hands in the faith of truth, the true faith. The spark of faith, the spark of emunah, becomes strengthened and revealed through the king gathering everyone together. And he reads before them, reads Torah before them. He says the melech is the live kol kal yisrael. The melech is the key, is the heart of the whole klal Yisrael. So when the king reads to them, bringt rein in den bittul, the kabbalah zamach shemayim v'yiras Hashem and alle Eden. He brings bittul, humility, and accepting of the yoke of heaven and the fear of heaven into every yid. Is peil durch sein makil sein die Eden as bazel das galaven and dinne kudas yadus was drik sich in the mun of v'yiras Hashem. The king causes that this should reveal within them the pintel yid, the Yiddish spark, the Jewish spark, which is expressed through emunah and yira. Und der Rebbe lehnt menech die parashish shma vayim shemeya. Therefore, we read these parashas, Shema v'Hayim Shmeya. Shema is Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shemayim, the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. V'Hayim Shmeya is Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs, the acceptance of the yoke of mitzvahs. And the parasha Sima El Melech, and the parasha with regards to the mitzvah of appointing a king. But das Alt is Me'erir und Karbt Arayin Bazei di Emunah and Yiras Hashem. This inspires them and inculcates within them the faith and the fear of Hashem. Af Meshech from the Ala Yorin for the duration of their entire life. Kol Hayomim Asher Atem Chaim Adam, all the days that you're alive on this earth. High time, and for this reason is the mitzvah. Therefore, this mitzvah applies to all Yidden equally. Because this pintel Yid that is expressed when a Yid is inspired, awakened by his emunah in Hashem, is equal by every Yid, from the greatest to the simplest. Even by children, believers, the children of believers. Because it's not something that's dependent on intelligence, which a child might not be capable of. It's talking to the core of the soul, which every single Yid has. So this is the first aspect. The first aspect is the aspect that Hakhel applies to every single Yid, because the purpose of Hakhel is to awaken the emunah, to inspire the pintel Yid, to bring it out into the open, and every Yid has a pintel Yid. And therefore the mitzvah applies to everyone equally. On the other hand, the chiyuv mitzvah is on the makil. Base is not angesagt geworden zu jedem Yachid. However, it's not commanded to every single individual, nor zum Makil zum Melech. It's commanded to the king. Weil der richtige chizuk, the true strength, as the words we said before, machazikos, v'hiseirus, and the true inspiration, the true arousal, awakening, from the nekudas hayadus, nekudas emunah, bizas zolpeil nafkal yom, to the point that it should be able to have an impact for the whole person's life. Is nitbekach atzmai. A person cannot do that by themselves. Nor mitzad al yedei the melech. The person needs to rely on the king. But it is the neshama klolis from klolis ha'am. The king is the neshama that is connected with the entire people, and therefore the king could bring about by them the inspiration that should affect them for the rest of their life. That's why the chiyuv is on the melech, because the melech is the one who triggers the inspiration. But then the mitzvah is on everyone, because the inspiration is accessible, and therefore something that is applicable to everyone. Anashim nashim v'taf. When Alpiza is moving on inyan nifla was gefindt by the mitzvah Hakhel, and because of this we find something incredible by the mitzvah of Hakhel. Das peilt nitner auf a meshach zman, wie gefindt by aliyah l'regel. This is something that affects the person not just for a limited amount of time, like we find by aliyah l'regel, that it would inspire the person until the next yontif. It impacts the person all the days that he lives on this earth. Since we're talking about the neshama klolis that is inspiring the etzem nefesh, you're talking about yichida, which is not affected by changes that are going on around them. So in other words, a yid goes to Hakhel and he hears the Torah of the king. Then the king, who is the neshama klolis, inspires this yid for the rest of their life. Even in a time when he can't see the king, even in a time when he can't actually hear the words of Torah coming directly from the king, but by hearing and learning the Torah from the king, from the neshama klolis, then for years and years later, it will have this impact on him to be me'eder his yichidish nefesh, to be me'eder his etzem nefesh, to be me'eder the amunah shebenafshay, even if he's in the gather of a taf. And in addition to this, in Mevar Torah Shebal Peh, Gemara and Rashi, the Torah Shebal Peh explains in the Gemara and Rashi, was in Irvert Nisgala, in the Torah Shebal Peh becomes revealed to us. Das was is mufla u'mechusa tamir v'nelam, which is removed and concealed and hidden in Torah Shebechsav, something that Torah Shebechsav we don't know, but Torah Shebal Peh brings it out into the open. Atzu dem gilu yu bi'ischaskes von der Emunah zu dem Melech. Darf eich kumen, darf eich zukommen der Gili von der Nekuda. Sie darf wirken me'edes an die Keches Pnimiyim. So now we have like this. We have the king who has the main mitzvah because the inspiration comes from the king. We have the obligation upon every yid because every yid has an etzem nefesh and every yid has the Nekuda Sayadus Shabbai. But there's another thing which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught us. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught us in Torah Shebal Peh that there's also a concept of Lilmid v'Lishmaya, which is part of the mitzvah. What is that? That in addition to revealing and strengthening the emunah, we have to reveal that into the open in a way it has to impact and awake also the internal keiches of the person. Internal keiches usually refers to seichel and midas. It's not just something that is in the core of the person, but also in the person's operational faculties, also need to be inspired by this Hakhel. And for this you need the individual. For this, not enough of the Melech inspires, the Yachid himself has to do. And once you're talking about the abilities of the individual, then not everyone is the same. Each person has to operate according to his abilities. The Anoshim in their way, the Noshim in their way, etc. And the Gemara continues that when you bring the children, when you include them in Hakhel, this actually elevates the bringers, those who bring them. We could say that more than you can accomplish with yourself, you can accomplish through bringing others to the Hakhel. When you connect your children with the Melech, you are elevated through that. Maybe even more than you elevate yourself through the connection to the Melech. Yud base von dem hat man this teaches us a practical lesson. Afal pi as the mitzvah von Hakhel is it's nicht shaykh Peil, even though the mitzvah of Hakhel is not a practical today. Calls man the Beis Mikdash is noch nicht aufgebaut geworden as long as the Beis Mikdash has not yet been rebuilt. Is the Chabar Teire he nitzche the Teire is eternal. When you have the ruchnis the mitzvah dagam as man hazel b'chol makim, and in the spiritual sense this mitzvah applies even today in every time and in every space. Men dav zen as b'meshach timechag Sukkos b'miuchad, specifically during Sukkos. We should gather as many yidden as possible. Without looking at what state they're in, what situation they're in. They're tough, including children. Especially those who are obligated to mitzvahs. But when it comes to their knowledge, they're like children because they don't know a lot. They too have to be brought into a gathering amongst other yidden. And even this might be someone who in the level of knowledge could be like a child that hasn't even reached the age of education, and he's not yet capable to understand the significance, the meaning of Teire, of mitzvahs of Yiddishkeit. But by bringing him into a gathering of Yidden, which whenever there's a gathering of Yidden, the Shechina rests upon it. Especially a gathering whose purpose is to awaken people to fear Hashem. This helps this Yid, this Taf Yid. As is to reveal the spark of Yiddishkeit, the spark of faith, which is always there, even though it's concealed. And this helps that the person who brings them in will also receive a schar, an elevation in his Aveda. And even with regards to the children, or the child, the adult child that's being brought in, the Nekudas HaEmunah will permeate him entirely, as is that even his internal faculties will become transformed, as they'll be able to listen, they'll be able to learn, to be able to fear Hashem, and be able to follow and observe all the words of this Torah. And then when then we're able to merit to the fact that this great gathering, assembly, will return here. We'll be able to observe, to experience Hakhel with the King Mashiach, zusammen mit Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, all together in the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi.